Hello, and welcome to the 2021 Veterans Florida Virtual Expo hosted by Bank of America. I'm Amy Entris, and I'm the Entrepreneurship Development Manager at Veterans Florida, and I am a Navy veteran. My background is in program management in a few different industries, including project management and government contracting, agriculture, and also I have some personal experience in being an entrepreneur. So we're here today to discuss the topic of bootstrapping, which is one of my personal favorites because it's so critical to any company that's in the startup phase. So I'm joined here today by an esteemed panel. So we'll go ahead and start with introductions. Diane?
Yes, I'm Diane Denslow. I'm an associate instructor in the Coggan College of Business at the University of North Florida. And I teach mainly in our entrepreneurship minor, the entrepreneurship courses. And I'm also a business analyst with a small business development center, and I've been working with them for almost 20 years. And so I work predominantly with them in the summers, but also through this CARES Act, I've been working during the school year as well.
Wonderful, thank you. Troy?
Yep. My name's Troybolivar. I'm a Navy veteran. I spent 5 years as a corpsman. I am the Veterans Program Coordinator at Florida Gulf Coast University, and we have 2 startup programs for veterans with either a business idea or they just started their business and they're looking to really get it going. And then we also have a growth program for veterans who are looking to scale their business.
Wonderful, thank you. Kevin?
Hi, I'm Kevin Cox. I work at the FAU Adams Center for Entrepreneurship, and I'm also an instructor for the College of Business, and I teach at our new venture accelerator known as Tech Runway. And of course, I'm the coordinator for our Veterans Florida Entrepreneurship Program. So I get the opportunity to work with and help a ton of startups, and hopefully I can provide something of value here today.
Yes, I know you will. You always do. You all always do. So we're very fortunate to have you on this panel today and also to work with you all throughout the year. So we'll go ahead and get started with our first topic, which is how do you get started with a very limited budget? In other words, how do you start a company with a shoestring budget? Diane, do you want to start?
Sure. I think obviously it's a challenge of many entrepreneurs, but one factor is the type of business that you start. If you're a service type of business and you can initially operate out of your home or your garage, you need a lot less in terms of capital. Perhaps you don't even have any employees. But I would say too, it can be a major problem to not have sufficient funds because in my experience working with entrepreneurs, being undercapitalized is really a major factor. They maybe have enough money just to get started, but not enough to carry them over until they are profitable. So it's very important to develop some pro forma financial statements to make that assessment, to make sure that you are. But that's one way. Some people start working part-time in their business, kind of testing the waters. And again, it depends on the type of businesses. Obviously, you couldn't do that for a restaurant or other types of businesses, but some do that and they can stay working, full-time at their job and then doing this on a part-time until they see that it's a viable business. So those are 2 different options.
Okay.
Yeah, I can add on to that. Closely related to starting a service or leveraging an expertise, I actually like people to consider an approach that's a little bit counterintuitive to where rather than focusing on what you may not possess, which might be financial capital in this instance, right? So that's what we're talking about here. What knowledge, skills, abilities, experience, advantages do you personally possess or have direct access to? Right? So this extends to friends, family, coaches, mentors, teachers, other resources in your environment, accelerator, startup program, Veterans Florida Entrepreneurship Program, of course, other educational components, the SBDC, SCORE, but really taking stock of all the resources that you do have and how you might better leverage those. And then of course you do need to transition to, okay, but these are the resources I'm lacking. And you can potentially counteract those limited financial resources by leveraging the resources that you do possess, or leveraging those resources as a conduit or an access point to more financial resources or whatever you may be missing.
Mhm.
Yeah, going off of what Kevin said, you can always find an incubator. And for veterans in Florida, especially, we have multiple network partners throughout the state who all specialize in helping veterans launch their business. I know ours specifically, we help the veteran determine we help them figure out who their customer is and what value they're going to be providing. We provide them with mentors. And then at the end of the program, they also have an opportunity to be awarded seed funding, which helps them get started. But if that isn't an option, you can start by just understanding who your customer is and figuring out what their needs are and really emphasizing with them, and develop your solution small from there, and you can take $1,000 and invest that into your idea. So that way you're not breaking the bank, you're not having to go out and get loans, you're not searching for VC funding. You can take that $1,000 and validate to see if people are actually interested in wanting your product or service.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because we often talk about the fact that, there's a lot of startup costs associated with getting a business up and running, but that obviously is not the only thing that you need. So what are some other things that our veterans need to consider when starting up an organization or a company?
I would say one thing is they need to have some information, particularly in terms of market research, knowing who that customer segment is. And if there are sufficient numbers of those individuals, I think they also have to have information about their competitors. What are they offering? And how can you distinguish yourself from them so that you have some distinctive competence in terms of what the consumer might want. And I'll just mention one other item too. I think it's important to start to think about that team that you might have. Now, you may be just you or another person working with you, but you can have what I call, or is called, an adjunct team. Think about some advisors that you might engage. This could be a small business development center analyst, or someone at an incubator, or SCORE, or others who, if you can't afford to have them, as you can't afford hired individuals, you can have adjuncts. These are people who can assist you in terms of maybe helping you develop your business plan, your business model canvas, looking at things for your business. But think about having people, especially if you don't have any business experience or you don't have industry experience. I think it's good to have individuals who can complement you in the skills that you may lack, and you don't have to pay for these services. I know we're going to talk later about resources available, and there's a plethora of resources available. So I'll stop there and let the others kind of add to that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, one thing that I think that, somebody should always try and find, if they're trying to start a business, you should find a mentor, kind of like how Diane was saying, but somebody who can give you business experience, or who you trust that has business experience that can provide you with some guidance. And they don't necessarily have to have direct industry experience, but, just business experience in general. So that way you can bounce your ideas off of them. Mentors, most of the time they're great for networking as well. So, your network is only so big, but a mentor and somebody, it starts to grow your network, and that becomes valuable.
Yeah, I think Troy and Diane have really both kind of touched on one of the main tenets when we talk about this area, which is, that pre-development work, conducting that research, and then, as Troy mentioned to the last question, really digging into that customer development, because as the core question is, what else do you need? You need customers. That's what you need, whether it's by providing a service so you can keep, your costs really, really low, or, landing a contract, right? So, you're going to be paid. I love when businesses essentially do all the pre-startup work and then the business starts when they land that first contract, whether that involves leaving a job or taking a little time off initially rather than leaving it. But you've got a customer, you've got revenue. This is one of the big misconceptions in the whole entrepreneurship space. And I deal with it like I'm sure my colleagues do as well. People come in the office, they got a great idea, and it might genuinely be a great idea. And all they need is funding. Well, traditionally, that's a misconception. There's really no funding at that stage, right? Aside from some of the resources that we've talked about and some more we'll talk about here and some kind of tricks of the trade to get around that. But there are not traditional investors who invest in ideas. Instead, they're looking to invest in businesses. And until you've got customers, arguably, it is really just an idea as opposed to a business that someone could then, who's not friends and family, who's a professional investor, could genuinely consider investing in, not at that fundamental ideal stage. So the fastest you can get to customers, and along with customers comes revenue, the better. Because then again, that starts solving a lot of problems. There's a lot of synergy there at the same time where you've got revenue coming in. So that financial constraint is sort of lessened. At the same time, you've got a customers, which is a really interesting transition from idea to business. And then you can start about things like, upselling and cross-selling and referral programs. The customer is central in all of that. So I really encourage all entrepreneurs. Again, depends on the nature of the business. If you're trying to do mining in outer space, it's going to be tough. But, within the decade, there will be contracts available for service providers that, provide those types of services, whereas some businesses are a lot easier and quicker. And there's so many resources to throw up a website and get going.
Mhm.
I think that's a good, I'm sorry.
No, good. Go
I
ahead.
think good point that Dr. Cox mentioned is getting that traction. I don't think that's emphasized that much when we talk about startups with businesses, that, getting some traction, showing that there's some interest, or maybe you have at least some sales there to show. I think that shows that there's demand in the marketplace for what you want. It validates your business idea as well.
Right. So we've basically talked a lot about, what it costs to have, to do a startup. But, Diane, you mentioned earlier pro forma. So how do you determine what kind of costs are associated with getting started, and what other expenses can you anticipate?
Again, going back to that research, doing some market research, sometimes you can actually talk to a business owner in the same industry that maybe they're not in your trading zone. For example, we're in Jacksonville. This might be somebody in a similar metro area, maybe Tampa area, and you can, get some information from them. Or you can even go to a business analyst, perhaps at SCORE or the SBDC, somebody who might have, some knowledge about that, so they can help you with that. And I always when I talk to individuals starting too, I say, think about your business. If it's a brick and mortar, then do sort of a mental walkthrough of that business, thinking about what will be the size of it, where will it be located, because that determines, square footage. And think about, will it have, what furnishings will it have, what equipment will I have? So you sort of do that mental walkthrough of it, and you start thinking about what I'll actually need. Then you have to find, the cost of some of those things. And you can even do some online research if you're looking for, your point of sale systems and different things like that. And that's where I also suggest to my clients that you use some type of template, a startup worksheet where you can go in and just, there's suggested items. They're sort of generic, right? They may not all apply to you, but it starts helping you think about, oh, yes, I'll have to have insurance, right? Or I may need some marketing prior to startup, opening the doors. And then also doing that for your sales forecast, do it for 3 years, and then have a set of assumptions for each one. Like, okay, what would it, what might I, do in terms of sales, but then also for operating expenses too. Think about what each month, what will some of my costs be? Will I have rent? Will I have employee personnel costs? Those types of things. And so I think it is that is a difficult part, but I think you can get help from some of the resources that we're going to talk about, and some that I've just mentioned. Um, yeah, now I'll turn it over to my colleagues.
Okay, I think Diane, you really nailed that. So I don't have too much to add on to it, except for a trick that I can't take credit for. I recently learned from a very seasoned entrepreneur, and it is a fantastic one. So if you're starting a business venture where there is already an operational franchise, you can get your hands on these nice documents called franchise disclosure documents, FDDs, for that type of business. Not that I'm saying you should buy a franchise or get that franchise, but let's say you want to open a group fitness studio, but you're not going to do a CrossFit or something like that. You have your own model. Well, get some of those franchise disclosure documents, because due to federal regulations, they're extremely detailed. So finding all those costs that Diane talked about, they'll all be listed. Estimated expenses, geographic constraints, all these types of projections, you can get them for that type of business. Now, they're not going to be exactly the same. You may require different equipment, larger space, smaller space, but it's a really great place where somebody's already done the detailed stuff for you. And it's not research projections, it's historical data. You know exactly what they cost, how much money they brought in, all kinds of these nuances, and you can get those your hands on those documents. Sometimes there's a fee. Sometimes you want to portray an interested franchisee, but they're not that hard to get. In addition to that, as you start developing this financial model, which Diane outlined nicely, I just encourage you to think of it as a model and do some financial modeling, right? Don't just pour yourself into the spreadsheet for time and time, and then one day, perfection. This is my financial model. It's made for modeling, right? So what if you bought a location versus leased? What if you leased all your equipment and didn't buy anything, but what would those fees do? What would this look like? What if I had one more employee, one less employee, part-time versus full-time? You can then look at the model and see, this really isn't going to be as profitable as I want. How can I increase revenue? How can I reduce cost? And again, modify the model and test different things and say, well, does that need to cost that much? Does my location need to be there? Could it be over here? All these things you want to think about, not as a static projection sheet, but something that can change and should change.
Mhm.
Yeah, one of the things that I always tell the veterans in our program to do when we're going over financials is just figure out what it costs to produce one unit or to perform one service. Start with that. And you know that, like, to start, it's going to cost you more because you're not, buying in bulk or, whatever. But as you grow, those costs will decrease. But start with just figuring out what it's going to cost you to produce once, or one unit, or perform the service once. Yeah, like how Kevin and Diane were saying, there's a ton of resources online. You're gonna have to go online and do some digging and call around and figure out what you can learn. But you want to figure out what items, looking at your personal inventory, see what items you already have and what items you're still in need of, and then from there, what can you rent, lease, outsource, and then from there, figure out what actually needs to be purchased. And you might be able to purchase it used, which will save you money if you're on a limited budget. But yeah, I think starting with one.
Mhm. That's great advice. Yeah, start small.
And
Yes.
I'm sorry, Amy, I think when Dr. Cox mentioned that a tool. Years back, I used a tool from the Kauffman Foundation. It was integrated software, and I know there's lots out there, but it's really nice, like you say, he was saying that you can go in and put in some projections for startup costs or your sales forecasts or your operating expenses. Then you can see, can I be profitable, at that level of sales? And it might be that your operating costs are too high and you have to look at, can I reduce those, or can I get better buys with my suppliers, or do I need to increase sales to be viable? And it can really give you a good idea, but it's so nice to have a template like that that's integrated, because then you can make one change in sales and it, carries over into your other statements as well. So there's, like you say, there's a number of tools like that, but I think it's a valuable resource for business owners, so that they can basically, on paper, see if they would be potentially viable. And I think what a lot of entrepreneurs do is they overestimate their sales, thinking that people will buy sooner, because it takes time to build a customer base. And so that I find with some business owners is a problem, because then they don't have enough working capital to carry them till they are profitable. So I think you have to have sort of that ramp up period where, maybe the first few months, you realize that even with your projections, you're not going to be at that level. People aren't going to be flocking at your so-called door right then too. So be realistic in your numbers. And so that's been my experience, that people sometimes overinflate the numbers because they love the idea. And of course you should like what you do and believe in it. But I think you have to be realistic as well. So that's one of the things I found.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of my favorite practices is called a stress test.
Mhm.
So you don't have those sales like you mentioned, Diane. How is that going to impact, the bottom line? So
Mhm.
definitely great advice. And so we also talked about other resources like SBDC, VBOC, SCORE. What are some other resources that our entrepreneurs can use to get started?
Well, if you want me to take this start again, we just had in our area, we have a Chamber of Commerce, of course, and they have a veterans guide to starting a business, and they have a program, entrepreneurial growth divisions. They have other resources, but they just started by a veteran, of course, a Veterans Chamber of Commerce. So it was really neat to see that just started this year in our area, and it's part of a national organization. And so we've mentioned already the SBDC SCORE, and of course, the Small Business Administration, the SBA.gov website has a plethora of, information, resources available as well. And in our area, we've had several Vetrepreneur summits. And last year, the organizers put together a Vetrepreneur small business guide, and it's been just a super valuable tool. And I put it on our Canvas site for our Veterans Florida group as well. And I'm going to stop to give everybody a chance, because
No, that I would love access to that tool so we can share it with our audience.
yeah,
So,
I'll be glad to do that.
okay, yeah, sure. We'll definitely share that. So,
And some are area specific, but others are not.
fair enough. Okay.
So one of the things that I've encouraged veterans to do, and they've had good success with, is, you can look at these different databases and resources online, but sometimes it seems like it's just too broad and it doesn't hit on exactly what they need. So I've had veterans who actually will find another small business owner who's in a completely different part of the country, targeting, their own local community. And they've called that business and gotten a lot of helpful information. And they've actually, people want to help each other. So they've called, they've, asked questions, and that other small business owner, they've been more than willing to help, especially because it's not going after their own customers. Once the veteran explains, like, hey, this is where I'm located, I'm looking to do something similar. I saw that, you're over here in, California or Oregon or something. They feel safe. But yeah, so you can find another business owner who's doing something similar to what you're doing, and give them a call and just ask. The worst that they're going to say is no thanks, or I'm not interested. But yeah.
Yeah, and that's not something we hear a lot in this veteran community. I mean, we hear more often that people are willing to help and not ask what I can do, but how much can I do, So we're very fortunate to have such a great community. Yeah.
So I'll just add a little bit more. I would totally agree with everything said so far. I'd also encourage you to get involved locally, get involved with the people, the ecosystem. We have a very similar shared Google Sheet that's out there with all of these resources and accelerators and a lengthy list. And then the other point that comes up a lot, that's another one of these misconceptions, is people have a general tendency, I think, if they're new to entrepreneurship and business ownership, to presume that competition is going to be cutthroat and, you're not going to get any help from a competitor. And in my experience, that's just typically not the case. And I hear it over and over again. I co-host a podcast called the Boca Raton Shrimp Tank, if anyone's interested. We've got about 150 episodes of interviews with entrepreneurs. And they typically, even right here in South Florida, they'll work together more so than they'll be competitive. They'll say, actually, job's a little too big for me. Let me refer you to this person who has a little bigger company. And then sometimes they'll send a referral the other way and vice versa. And it's really a pretty close-knit community in most cases. Every once in a while, some companies will bump up against one another. Sure. And, maybe that's because that tends to get the publicity, or we see that in, big tech companies battling for customers, but on a local and generally it's not that way. So yeah, and I'd encourage you to reach out to a business owner and learn from their experience. Don't make the same mistakes they did. We always ask people on the podcast things to avoid. What should they do? And they've always got a great answer, and it's usually something that's very expensive that they could have avoided and would have avoided next time. And, if you hear that from them, thousands and thousands of dollars can be at stake with a simple, well, actually, I tried that service provider or integrating that technology or whatever, and here's what happened. And then here's how I solved it. So why don't you just go to step 3 and solve it? And you don't want to make that mistake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely great advice. Kevin, you mentioned earlier in the discussion about, asking friends and family and coaches, to help you out when you're getting started. But if you're just striking out and you're just not getting anything, where else can you go? And what do you need to do in order to be ready to have an ask somewhere else?
That's a good question. See if you can get some feedback. I'm always really big on kind of feedback. If you're reaching out to people and you're consistently getting no's or not getting the answers you want, make sure you ask why. Why not? Why isn't that a good fit for you? I always encourage people to start with an interview, just like I do on that podcast and elsewhere. Typically, people like being interviewed. Certainly, they like it more than being sold stuff. So I tell all the veterans who take part in our program that they are now students, whether they are typical students or not. But that can be a really helpful introduction. And then if you can use that to open the door, say, hey, I've got an interview, blame it on me. I got mean old Dr. Cox. He's making me conduct these interviews I need only 5 minutes of your time. I'll accommodate your schedule. Just let me know. Make it easy. Make it so they can click a link on a calendar and just sign up. Make it so it's very simple and automated. Don't make people jump through hoops. And start small, but be tenacious, follow up, reach out to people and find the people you want. And once you have a sliver of a crack in that door open, I mean, you're typically going to be talking to these people, hopefully, whether they're a customer or a colleague, another business owner, about something that they enjoy or will potentially enjoy. Maybe they don't know about yet if they're a customer, but once you get them talking and you start interviewing them about their history, their experience, their background, their expertise, people typically like talking about themselves. Maybe you hit it off personality wise, hey, could I follow up with another interview? I'd love to buy you coffee. Subsequent to that, you may say, hey, have you ever mentored anyone? Have you ever thought about being a mentor? Or, have you thought about, we've talked a lot about my product, service, whatever it is, would you be interested in being one of our beta customers, and giving us the valuable feedback we need to keep building? Once you have that relationship sort of established, everything becomes easier. And I will say, don't be discouraged, because it's really those first few interviews or resources you're trying to access, maybe it's not an interview, that are typically the toughest. It tends, if you do it right, which involves requesting referrals, it should snowball. We call that snowball sampling procedure, because you get an interview with one, maybe business owner or customer, ask them for 2 referrals, ask both of those people for 2 referrals. You've got 4 referrals. From those, you have 8 referrals, and relatively quickly, you've got exponentially more resources if you do it that way. But admittedly, it can be hard to start.
Yeah. So, before even thinking about getting external funding or, asking friends and family, I think it's really important just to validate that your idea is there. Like, some people will want to purchase your product or service. Like, I think that's number one thing. And then from there, one thing that or at least I see it a lot, is people are they're scared to talk about their idea. They think that everyone's going to steal it. Really, like, that's not the case, because if you've been working on something for a while, like, you put so much work into it, and you know what you're doing at this point. You're putting all the pieces together, and the person who you're sharing, or who you're talking to about it, they don't know. So I think it's important to talk to people about what you're doing. So just like how Kevin was saying, talk about what you're doing, and people know each other, or everyone knows other people, and just grow that network. Obviously, you don't share trade secrets or IP or anything like that, but talk about the value that you're going to be providing, and eventually, somebody is either going to be able to help you, or they're going to know somebody that can help you.
Mm-hmm. And for those in-depth conversations, it wouldn't hurt to have an NDA in place too.
Yeah.
Favorite things. It gives everybody some peace of mind.
I'd like to add too to that networking part. Especially if you've had prior work experience, or particularly in a specific industry, then you start a business related to that. That's a valuable resource for you in terms of advice and asking questions, but also potentially as investors. I know we had one individual, he worked in the healthcare system, and he saw a need for integrated healthcare scheduling system. And so he engaged software developers. But one of the funders and person that gave him advice was one of the doctors that had worked in that system as well. So just, building that network of people who could give you advice, or might be somebody, because they know and trust you, could also be somebody who might want to invest in your business. And so just something to think about. I know that was mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and I'll just add to what Troy said, which I think is fantastic and totally accurate, is getting that validation. One of the mistakes that people I work with have a tendency to make, particularly if they're in B2B, business to business sales, is not getting to the human side of it ever. Which makes it pretty much impossible to get feedback, right? So they'll say things like, this is HR software solution for accounting firms. My customers are accounting firms. Or my customers, I get this one a lot because I hang around students, I'm going to sell this service, whatever it is, to universities. Oh, okay. Universities, fine. Do an interview with your customer. Well, you'll find that a university, it doesn't have much to say back, because it's just a group of buildings, right? So you've really got to dig in if you're on the B2B side. And I challenge people to say, no, like, who is that person who makes that buying decision? Okay, do they control the budget? Oh, they don't. Well, they have a supervisor. Well, what does their supervisor think? B2B sales can be pretty complex, and it's much easier to just say, we sell to fast food places, or we sell to no, who's a name and a person and someone I can find on LinkedIn that will say, yes, I will buy this. I have the budget. This person's the decision maker. We've both signed off. This is something we do. And that's validation, as opposed to, well, I analyze this type of business and they definitely need this. That will not be sufficient.
Mhm. Yeah, it's definitely important to get that feedback. And there's so many good online tools to, if you can't do it in person all the time, definitely use those online resources to get some of that valuable feedback. So yeah, I think you all have done an amazing job discussing the topics that we had today. So I want to give you an opportunity to add anything else, any parting words of wisdom to our audience today.
Sure, I'll jump in first.
Okay.
I've already said the most important things, fund via revenue, get customers. They're sort of more important than anything else. One thing we didn't touch on that I'll just note as I'm looking over kind of all the things I'd want to touch on in a series like this. If you're looking at analyzing the finances of your business, I'd encourage you also, again, I said, start with the resources you possess. Also start with your personal finances. Make sure those are in a very orderly manner before you go beyond that, right? So you can make smart, informed decisions about how much money you can spend and risk. Realize that it's risk on your business. Pay down your personal debt, get your credit card stuff taken care of, get everything nicely organized. Start with personal finance, then transition to business finance, because if you're kind of the sole founder, which is a lot of the people we work with, those inevitably are interrelated, right? Now, you never want to commingle funds. Once you get your personal house in order, you keep the business finances very different and distinctive from your own, but you're funding the business. So it's going from your personal to that side. So certainly don't commingle them, but they are necessarily, until you have outsiders involved, very much intimately related. So I encourage anyone to kind of start there, get all that stuff buttoned up, and then they can see a much clearer picture of what their financial resources are and how they want to manage that.
Mhm. Yeah,
Uh,
definitely communicate with your household. Go ahead, Troy.
no, I was just going to say, along with, you want to get your house in order, just like how Kevin was saying, but also, find a mentor and somebody to give you guidance. Like that's so important. And you don't want the mentor to be just a yes man or somebody who's always going to agree. You want to find somebody who will be, they'll give it to you straight and then say it in a way where it's encouraging, where you're excited to move forward and take advantage of their advice. And also just, build your network. The human capital is huge. So grow your network and, meet as many people as you can.
Mhm.
It's tougher being the third person speaking on it because you've all had great ideas. But I'll just reiterate a couple that I think are really important. That is, and it's been mentioned, to validate your idea. I've seen so many businesses that, they're in love with their idea, and you really need to validate it to make sure there is a demand and need in the marketplace for it. And then, as was mentioned by Troy, he says mentors or even advisors. There's so many resources available. Take advantage of them. Can help you avoid some of the pitfalls. There's no need to make, costly mistakes when you can avoid it. And also take the time to really lay out either your business model canvas or some type of business plan. At least look at the different aspects of your business, think through it, and develop some pro forma financial statements. They may not be totally accurate, but at least you've been thinking about what cost you may incur and how long it will take you to be profitable.
Mhm. Well, thank you to all of you for your time today and sharing your amazing advice and wisdom. Um, I can't tell you enough how much I think this will benefit our audience, and I'm sure we'll have follow-on questions at some point. So I'll share those with you as we get them. But I look forward to getting that link from you, Diane. And once again, I appreciate all your input and your time. So thank you for being here today, and I hope you have a great afternoon. So. Take care.
Thank you.